Well, thanks to everybody who voted in my last poll for the next film I should review. The clear winner was The Glass Key from 1942. So, I'm going to do a review of this one. This was an excellent crime film starring Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. I've been slowly working through the 4 films that they acted in together. And this one was just fantastic. I loved it. It's got political intrigue, really sharp, witty dialogue. It's got tough guys and fights. It's got a little bit of romance and all that great stuff I love from old crime films of this era. It was based on Dashiell Hammett's novel, and The Glass Key was just a brilliant film. So I'll give an overview of the story, spoiler-free, and then offer some closing thoughts. Well, the film opens up and we see the character of Paul Madvig, played by Brian Donlevy, and he's this tough political boss. He's at a busy campaign headquarters, and he's backing gubernatorial candidate Ralph Henry, played by actor Maroney Olson. Now, part of the reason he's doing this is that he has fallen in love with Ralph's beautiful daughter Janet, played by Veronica Lake. We get a good picture of Paul's personality early in the film, as when one of his assistants protests against his association with Henry, Paul tosses the guy through a window and then laughs about it. So Paul's best friend, Ed, played by Alan Ladd, he's there. He's this cool, collected fellow, and he warns his friend as well, telling him that the key to Henry's house that Paul insists he has may be a glass key that will break off in his hand. Hence the title of the film, you see. Now, a little later, gangster character Nick Varna shows up. He's played by actor Joseph Kalea. He visits Paul at the election headquarters and demands that he provide his nightclubs with protection from police interference, which is something that he has paid him for. Well, Paul turns on him and tells him that he's cleaning up the town and he's going to call the police chief to shut down Varna's clubs for good. Not a good idea. Well, Varna storms out, and on the way out the door, Paul even tosses a shoe at him and hits Nick's thug Jeff in the back. And Jeff is played here by William Bendix. He's amazing in this film. Now, later that night, Paul dines at Henry's home. But Henry's son, Taylor, played by Richard Denning of Creature of the Black Lagoon fame, he refuses to join them as he lives more of a wild party life of drinking and gambling. Now, Ed arrives and seems to get really friendly right off the bat with Janet. In fact, he doesn't seem to take his eyes off her. Now, later, Paul's 18-year-old sister, Opal, played by Bonita Granville, borrows some money from Ed that he happily gives to her, which she in turn secretly gives to Taylor so that he can pay off his gambling debts. Now, Ed, though, brings Opal to meet with Paul. Now, Paul has some issues with her relationship with Taylor. So a little bit later, Opal calls Ed, worried that Paul may have gone too far and that he wants to meet with Taylor because he wants to kill him. So she's kind of concerned about the guy. Well, Ed goes to investigate, and sure enough, he finds Taylor dead outside of his house. Paul maintains he's innocent, but he is suspected of the murder, so Ed goes to work to try to clear his friend's name. He meets with District Attorney Farr, played by Donald McBride. He's one of those actors I've seen in some of the Lloyd Nolan, Michael Shane films, and he seems a little suspicious of Paul. But he also seems to be reluctant to act against him, and apparently won't do very much. He seems to have kind of a fear of him and getting involved, so he kind of backs off a little bit. But he does say he's been receiving anonymous notes stating that Paul is indeed guilty. Well, Janet wants Ed's help to try to find out who the killer is, but he refuses at this point. Ed tries to tell Paul that he could be in trouble from his enemies, but the talk turns into a fist fight, and the men eventually part company. I mean, at one point, Ed has a broken beer glass in his hand he seems ready to cut Paul with, so the scene is pretty crazy. Varna hears about this fight that took place, and he offers Ed money for information that could frame Paul. Now, Ed rejects this. Bad idea, and then is taken hostage by Varna. He basically has his 2 thugs, Jeff and Rusty, beat him up pretty bad and kind of keep him as a prisoner. They really work him over, but one night, while Jeff and Rusty are making dinner, Ed is able to escape by starting a fire and crashing out a window several stories through a glass skylight. It's actually a pretty awesome scene as Ed makes his escape. Well, Ed makes his recovery at a hospital with the help of a lovely nurse played by Frances Gifford, who was Zandra from the movie Tarzan Triumphs. That's kind of cool. Ed learns that Janet and Paul have become engaged, and we can tell that he might be a little bit upset about this, that maybe he too has fallen for Janet. Ed warns Paul that Varna is bringing in Sloss, remember the guy he tossed out the window at the beginning of the film, as someone who claims to be a witness to Taylor's murder, and will have him testify against Paul. So having mostly recovered, Ed discovers from Paul that Opal has taken a mysterious trip to the countryside. He leaves and goes to this country house that belongs to the character Clyde Matthews, actor Arthur Loft, who is publisher of The Observer. There, Ed finds a gathering that includes Opal, Varna, Jeff, Rusty, and Matthews and his wife, Eloise, played by Margaret Hayes. Opal believes that her brother is guilty and has given a statement to Matthews to publish. Ed tells Eloise that Varna will call in the mortgage on The Observer after Matthews publishes this article. And after doing this, it will force the paper into bankruptcy. And Eloise, who apparently really loves money, is ready to give up on her husband and then starts to seduce Ed. And I have to admit, this scene gets a little weird. Basically, Ed just goes ahead and starts getting romantic with her while Matthews, in his own house, just walks away from Ed, who is on the couch alone with his wife. It's really kind of strange. Matthews goes to his room and ends his life. Wow. This scene, I will admit, just felt weird. I mean, watch it for yourself and see if you feel the same. Anyhow, later, Ed finds a note from Matthews in his room that names Varna executor of his estate, and he burns this. Rusty and Jeff are just about to give Ed another beating, and Jeff really has a sadistic gleam in this film about beating up Ed. But Paul suddenly appears and knocks Jeff out. Varna leaves, and Ed tells Paul to get a judge to appoint immediately an administrator for the Matthews estate to cancel out Opal's story. Paul admits to Ed that when he argued with Taylor, he had hit him, causing Taylor to fall, and he struck his head on the curb, and this had killed him. So Paul is soon arrested for questioning. Ed, meanwhile, discovers from studying a typewriter that it was Janet who had been typing these anonymous notes about Paul's guilt. Ed then tracks down Jeff to this grungy bar and, with the help of some drinks, tries to lure him into linking Varna to Taylor's murder, even though Jeff seems all but ready to clobber Ed again. And it's around here that Varna arrives and tells Jeff to be quiet. And you know my rule. I don't like to give away the ending, so I'm just going to leave things right here because the film's almost over. Will Ed get Jeff or Varna to confess? Will Paul be found guilty? And what will happen with the mysterious Janet? And does Ed really care for her? Well, you need to see the film for yourself to find out. Well, let me offer some closing thoughts here now. Watching this film, I thought it was great. And first off, the story is really amazing, and it's a little complex with so much going on. And the film can honestly take a couple watches to appreciate all of it. You know, I like going into a film with a complex story like this and trying to put it all together. And okay, to summarize, Brian Donlevy's character, Paul, he's a political boss. He's backing a candidate for governor. He shuts down a local casino, making the local mob angry. The candidate's son dies, so there's a murder mystery to solve. And then there's Alan Ladd as the character Ed. He's Paul's right-hand man who's there to solve the mystery of it all while falling for Paul's girl. So, yeah, there's a lot going on, but the pacing and the acting is also good. You just keep watching, even though it might not all make sense at first. The dialogue is just quick and witty in the film, and the characters, how they're performed, they're just fantastic. There's a depth and richness to all of the characters that just has you wanting to watch the film again, just to study how complex they can be. Primarily Alan Ladd as a character Ed. You know, he's the protagonist of the film, but he's sort of morally gray, and he's fascinating to watch. You know, he's cool, unmovable, and frequently has that hint of a smile, like he's just listening and calculating everything. You know, compare that with like Brian Donlevy's Paul, who is this loud, boisterous, impulsive character, you know, throwing his shoes at people and so on. It's just a great balance. And of course, Veronica Lake, complete with the peekaboo hairstyle, was great in this film as well. And I really liked her scenes with Alan Ladd. There's plenty of teasingly suggestive dialogue when she goes to visit him at, say, the hospital. There's lines like, "Hasn't your nurse been treating you well?" He says, "Not as well as I'd like." And she says, "Poor boy, if I had known you were being neglected, I would have come sooner." Like, I love that, just kind of that teasing dialogue between the two. I look forward to seeing the other films they've been in together. This film was the second of 4 films with Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake. The first one being This Gun for Hire in 1942, and the following 2 are The Blue Dahlia from 46 and Saigon in 1947. And I got to make a note about William Bendix as the big, thuggish, tough guy who just can't seem to wait to clobber Ed, and is truly a sadistic character who takes a sick pleasure in beating up the guy and calls him baby while he's beating him up. I love it. What's interesting is reading the trivia from the film is that during one of the film's beating scenes, Bendix accidentally slugged Ladd in the jaw for real and knocked him out. And this take survives in the finished film. I'm assuming it's the first punch that he uses because, boy, he just floors Alan Ladd in that scene. Now, the story behind this is that Bendix felt really bad about this, and he burst into tears. And Ladd woke up later and was so touched by Bendix's reaction that they became friends, and Ladd would later request him for many of his future films, helping him out with his career. I just think that's great. William Bendix also played a big, brutish, unbalanced character with Alan Ladd in The Blue Dahlia as well, so I couldn't help but pick up some of the similarities watching this too. I think he's a great actor. I need to do a biography of him in the future. And by the way, I like the meaning of the glass key as presented by Richard Lehman in his book Shadow Man, The Life of Dashiell Hammett. What he says is that a glass key symbolizes an act or experience which can't be reversed or forgotten. It's a key made of glass, which allows you into a room or a building, then shatters after use. Skeleton keys were used for many years before and after this story to lock doors from both sides. So a skeleton key made of glass would break in a lock and would prevent one from leaving the room. Therefore, once in the chamber, one is compelled to see one's choice through. I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, well, let me wrap this one up. The Glass Key from 1942 was an amazing crime film. It had great performances by Alan Ladd, Veronica Lake, Brian Donlevy, and William Bendix. And it was based on Dashiell Hammett's crime novel. The story can be a little complex, I will admit, but it makes sense after a couple watches. It's got some sharp dialogue, a really cool murder mystery, a little bit of romance, and it all combines for just a great crime film. And it's definitely one worth checking out.